Alright, so now we get into the more manager type stuff. So, for starter, Observer Pattern is the Mushroom Field. He's able to monitor everybody. They all can go in and out of him, which is kind of mixed because he's both the Observer and the Factory together. So he owns them, or like he can observe the ones in his list, and he also is in charge of creating everybody. This, please don't worry about this. So this was purely used for debug instead. Like, outside knowledge of the arrays was purely used for testing. Like, so I could script things. So, how all this works. So, the game manager is the actual object who sits in the field and calls everyone. Like, he has alarms to spawn everybody. Who is spawned in the scene. This little guy. So that's how I know when all my alarms are called. He's not all too interesting, the fact that he just controls alarms. The more interesting guy is now this wave manager, who has a struct, which is called level values. Or, well, it is currently a class with public values. That all have default values, but then they're set at the beginning. Load values from text file. And then this is the dumb approach. It's not these. It assumes the designer followed the pattern. Like it goes next get line, get line, get line. So it will fail if the designer does something silly. This guy, I'm actually intentionally leaking this guy, so I only ever do this once, which is nice. But yeah, so in your scenes, you'll actually see that these guys are. He's not in here. Just like the heads up display manager and the player manager. Just if we're gonna leak one, I just leaked three. Like, I stopped trying to be fancy. This guy is in charge of all the logic of coordinating between the player manager and the game manager. The game manager is the guy who's actually on the ground spawning everything. This guy is just an intermediary for everybody. And he knows all the level values. Which whenever he changes a level, he will then call this function of update manager the current level values. Which is current level -1, because in my game I store like level 1 as 1 instead of level 1 as 0. Which makes life easier when I'm interacting with my array level values. Which is currently maxed at 3, because my text file is only 3. So I mentioned the player manager. He is most relevant when like players die, a score is added, because he has all these outside values for update current player points, current player lost a life, current player moved to the next level, spawn player ship. All the outside systems call this player manager who keeps this current idea going, this current player, who is another example, or actually it's the first example of the strategy pattern I've demonstrated, who I have player one solo. I know this name is slightly redundant, but I am a fan of overly obtuse names, or not obtuse names, but smack you over the head with a book kind of names. As you can see in here, player is just the parent that they are all going to inherit from. He has a bunch of virtual functions and then some other functions that I want everyone to have, and then some protected values that they'll get passed down. Player 1 solo, he's nice and simple. Just restart the field whenever he dies. Otherwise you spawn this guy, the high score input collector. He's a guy who actually is catching the input at the end of the game. You'll see the other guys will reference him too. I'll show him later. Player 1 with other player has similar code, but now he basically also will try to pass control back over to player 2 sometimes by calling this set player, player manager set current player to match other player. This one's kind of funny in the fact that it passes reference to his own mushroom grid and then the mushroom field just edits it. I think that's probably easier. You just literally pass a reference to your mushroom grid. He's uniquely different from player 1, the fact that he also has to check player 2 if they're higher, because they're not actively resetting the abilities. Player Attractor, it's the same thing, just dumb. Basically ignores everybody, has no concept of score level. Oh, sorry. He doesn't store his level, but the outside game will still try to progress levels. Reset player values, so the function that will try to call on all of them, just for resetting all of them back to like 1 for when you're going back and forth between one player mode versus 2 player mode. And then he has the functions that control swapping between the 2 controls. And then current player, current player. So I brought up I brought up this guy. In game management, I have the three oddballs. The game manager, who's the physical object that has all the alarms. Mode selection I haven't touched on, but he basically only appears in the attractor mode, and he sits there and listening if you click key 1 or 2. Very easy. And then this guy is how I pick up whether or not. So you tell him whether or not your player mode and whether or not players set a high score, and then he'll go through and set all of them. Which is a little messy. This probably should have been a strategy pattern. I'm not sure. Probably, yeah, actually. Holder equals B, which is just the backspace. Equal sign. And then you'll basically ignore it if you get maxed out, unless you're clicking delete. And you can't delete if you're full. Fairly straightforward. And now all of this is displayed using the heads-up display manager, who is an awful sea of just. Also, I see why you wanted this as arrays. Oh my god, that got so much easier. A ton of unmagikified numbers for this awful mess of just seas of offsets for getting the positions of everybody set up correctly. Which is nice because now I can just adjust the first top level value and they'll all get updated. Offsets, yeah. It's all fairly straightforward. This guy is our example of our flyweight. And then he actually has a strategy pattern into him as well. I have a strategy pattern for all my different displays, like 1-player mode, 2-player mode, attractor mode, and congratulations player 1 and player 2. I'm not sure if those need to be separate, but hey, they're there. They're easy. They're both one string. Just one says congratulations player 1, the other says congratulations player 2. They're probably a little bit redundant, but hey, if the designer wanted to do anything fancy, it's safe there. They all inherit from the heads-up display strategy, which is just there to draw. And then from there, they will all implement what they think drawing is. And then now we go to our fun commands. These are just C's of command patterns. Sound Manager, yes, has the previously mentioned silent mode versus normal mode. Which I believe this version of the video mentions it. If I didn't, just in case. Oh, I'm an idiot. Normal mode does work. Silent mode does nothing. I close that file. Set up all these. I still have the master volume. Yeah, so he controls all of the sounds, and then he passes commands to everybody, who then will tell him who to interact with. They'll tell him like to play a sound on my sound or play a looping sound on my sound. My sound is the sound that they get passed in here. When they say to get sound, you say like start looping, stop looping. This way they can call specific commands on the audio. Like for the centipede footstep is a looping sound. So when you get him, you start looping, you set the loop true, and you play it. And whenever you do the stop looping sound command, which is right here, you set the loop false, stop it. And that way they can all be reused with each other. You can loop any of them just using this system, as long as this implies that your commands are called appropriately, which I feel like is a safe assumption. Score Manager is very straightforward. It's the exact same idea. Doesn't have a strategy pattern, but he's the exact same idea, with the only unique exception is score by distance. The other one was literally just pass. I have score, add my score, which he gets from these values, which is just the game settings for everybody.